Hello, my name is Joanne Knight. Welcome to the barn. Today I'm going to do a barn buddy on restart. I had somebody ask me about that recently. I'm working on this quilt right here, which was a quilt that was given to me by the Southern Bells, and no, it's not quite as wrinkled as what it looks like in that picture. I'm using this pattern right here by Christy Dillon to quilt in this little chicks outside border, and they're not spaced evenly, so I'm having to do some adjustment. But what happened was I got to a point, let me put my crosshair there. This little point right here is where I am, and sometimes I would go over the little beak that's this little tiny spot right here. Sometimes I would go over that if it fits right up against the little chick and so it looks like stitching the ditch. But in this particular case, whenever I was quilting, this line right here went through the beak and it went through the orange part, and I'm using off-white thread to match the background of 451 and So Fine. And besides that, I missed this ditch down here, which will bother me. So what I'm gonna do, I unsewed back to the other side of the beak, and I tie and bury my threads anyway. So I did that, and I'm gonna do a restart. Let me put my crosshairs back on. I'm gonna do a restart, and I was asked to be able to explain this, and I thought this was a good time to be able to do that. So I'm going to take my machine head and I want to restart right here, which is actually on the other side of the little beak. If I tell it to quilt right now and I say start quilting, you see how this pattern right here, the start says over here, but the pattern is kind of half red and half black. Creative Studio thinks that I am happy with this pattern because it finished quilting that complete pattern, because these are two different patterns right here. So I've got to tell Creative Studio, no, I don't want you to start here. I want you to start back where I have my crosshairs, which is in the previous pattern. So instead of saying start quilting and it go down to the start of this pattern right here, I'm going to tell it to restart quilting. And it goes to the spot where it thinks that I want to restart, because remember, this pattern right here is a complete pattern. This pattern was halfway quilted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my machine head back to the point where I actually want to start quilting. And a lot of times, if it's a pattern that quilts back over itself, what I will do is hit the forward button, goes back to that spot because that's where it thinks it needs to be. Nope, I want you to go back to the other spot, and it won't move. The head is locked, so I'm going to say cancel. I'm going to go back to this spot. I'm going to go back to restart quilting, and once again, it moves there. So you could kind of do this for a little while. The difference is when I move back to the spot I want to quilt at, I need to say use this point. And now Creative Studio should forget the previous point, and it should say, oh, she wants me to start here. So now when I hit the forward, it goes forward about 7 stitches. If I hit the back and I hit back again, it will back up. So I use that to say, okay, where do I have to go where there is no stitching? If it's a pattern that quilts back on itself, I may do that forward until I find that there's no stitching, because I want to be able to see what the path of that pattern is. If it were feathers and I were quilting feathers and I needed to do a restart, then before I ever say restart quilting, and if it breaks the thread, You can do an auto restart, but what I did was hit cancel, so I had to go back up to the restart icon. It works the same way. I would run F2 and see what the pattern looks like before I say, okay, let me see where I need to start my quilting. But that backwards and that forward button is really helpful to you to be able to do this. So I can now say quilt. Creative Studio will start quilting where I want it to quilt. It's quilting a little faster than I want it to, so I'm going to be hitting the decrease speed button so that when I get down to that boundary on the bottom, which is my inside seam, I'm going to be able to hit that ditch like I should have done to start with. So hopefully this explains Restart to you a little bit. Thank you.